Hello, people, and welcome to the People Building Podcast, where today I am joined by the most inspiring David Richman. David has a really challenging past, and the life that he had doesn't quite add up to the life that he's got now, if I'm being completely honest, because he comes from a very chaotic upbringing with a very elderly dad and a very young and perhaps somewhat dysfunctional mum, and he really wasn't raised. He wasn't raised in a way that a young person should be raised. And so it really looked like the odds were stacked against him. And for a while they were. David, as well as surviving chaos, ended up being one of those people on a journey to make everybody else happy. And that was his way of fulfilling that need for love that he'd actually missed out on as a result of having the parents that he'd had. So he, like many, went on to this martyrish journey in life of finding the weak and wounded and doing what he could to save them in order to feel that sense of love and connection and respect and all of the things that ultimately human beings need from one another. And guess what? It did not work out too well for him. So David ended up being a subject, a victim of domestic violence. So there are some mentions of that during this podcast, and the interesting thing to note with this is, of course, when we think about domestic violence, we usually think about men as being perpetrators rather than the victims. And actually, in this instance, the boot was on the other foot. Things made a drastic turnaround for David when a good friend of his had the foresight to point out that he had this pattern of looking for trouble and then complaining when he found it. And actually, this friend, even though the conversation was, I'm sure, very uncomfortable because the friend was saying, I've kind of had enough of you. Actually, this was a real wake-up call. This was the start of him turning around his circumstances. So going through something very negative and actually it putting him on a different trajectory that led to a much more positive life overall. So he cleaned up his self-talk, because we know how damaging that can be. He cleaned up his self-talk and he began to identify what his own patterns were in how he might be causing trouble for himself sometimes, and actually started to take value in the lessons that life was offering him, because as he says, life lessons only mean something if you actually put them into action, if you actually do something with the lesson. Otherwise, it's just information. But if you want that information to mean something, you actually put it into practice in some way. And that he did. And he has done so magnificently, spectacularly. And this is a man who, as a result, I believe this is his rocket fuel. This is what gives this man so much energy to do as much as he does in his life. So I have great pleasure in sharing with you my conversation with the wonderful and very, very focused and energized David Richman.
Perfect.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the People Building Podcast. And today I am joined by the fabulous David Richman. And he has got, well, more than one story to share with us, I feel, having looked at the various bits and pieces that make up his biography. So I'm sure that today we're not just going to be entertained, but I feel already that there's going to be some very useful and important lessons for us to take from this conversation. And this one, I think it's going to take some dissecting. So without further ado, welcome, David. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Gemma. Nice to be here. I really appreciate it.
Not at all. So let me get you telling us a little bit of your backstory. Where are you now? Where have you been? Where did you grow up? What's the beginnings of life? What did that look like for you?
Sure. So my wife and I split our time between Las Vegas and Southern California.
Nice,
So
sunny places.
they're both great places. They have their benefits and their drawbacks, but I don't know. I consider Las Vegas more home. It's
Okay.
not what most people think. Just the strip and glitz and
Yeah.
glamour and a bunch of degenerates. It's actually a really wonderful place and very outdoorsy. I love the heat,
Yeah.
and I do a lot of training for events, and I prefer to do it in the heat.
Uh-huh.
And Las Vegas has a lot of heat, so
Nice.
uh, yeah. So I love it. I love being here in Vegas.
Did you grow up
Easy
there?
travel.
Is that where you're from originally?
Well, yeah, that's a good question because growing up is an interesting term. So I grew up in Southern California,
Okay.
but I grew up in a household that my parents were 38 years age in difference.
Oh wow.
So yeah, so when I was born, I had a mom who was 21 and really didn't know that she hated kids,
Hmm.
and I had a dad who was 59,
Hmm.
who I'm sure at that point in his life really didn't want kids.
Yeah.
So my sister and I grew up in a household that was very not friendly, not
Yeah.
happy, not nurturing, not guiding. It was not any of that. And when I was
Okay.
18, I embarked to head out to college,
Yeah.
and like in a movie, but it's the truth. My car broke down in Vegas. I was 18
Right.
years old,
Yeah.
and within 3 days, I was robbed at gunpoint of
Oh my
everything I
goodness.
owned,
Right.
and I didn't really have anybody to call or anything to do. So I had less than $1 in my pocket and no job and nobody to call, and was homeless for a little bit, and then finally strapped my way into growing up. So yeah, it was tough. It was a tough shock. But
Yeah.
yeah, so long answer, but yes, I actually grew up in
Yeah.
Vegas.
Wow. With a bumpy start. So you mentioned that you have a sister. Is she older or younger than you?
She was a year and a half older. She passed
Okay.
away about 15 years ago from brain cancer, which is
Oh,
one of the kind of tougher things that I went through that uh, helped me work on a project that we'll probably talk a little bit about today.
okay. Okay. I'm very sorry for your loss. That must have been a very challenging situation to work through.
Yeah, everybody goes through loss, and one loss is not better or worse than the other. They're all difficult. I mean, you can't imagine what it might be like to lose a parent you're close to or a child you're
Yeah.
close to, a friend. I mean, they're all just tragic and horrible.
Yeah.
When she passed away, I had plenty of time to grieve that because she had terminal brain cancer, and that took a couple of years to take her. So you get some time to work through your issues and talk to
Sure.
each other, whatever. But
Yeah.
I didn't realize till years later that I didn't have to grieve losing her. I had to grieve losing the one person on the earth that cared about what I was like as a child.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
we had that childhood together. Nobody else knew me
Of
like she
course.
did. Nobody
Yeah.
else could have. And so I had to grieve that. That's a different
Yeah.
kind of loneliness. So
Yeah.
everybody has their particular type of grief. And like I've said, none is worse than the other or easier or
Of
harder than the
course.
other.
So you landed yourself in Vegas. You're 18 years old.
Mhm.
What was the first thing that kind of what was the next significant thing that happened? Was it getting into work? You said you were on the streets there for a while, which sounds kind of
Yeah.
chaotic. So yeah, what happened there?
It was pretty chaotic because I wasn't a smart, savvy, wise, streetwise, you know,
Right.
well equipped 18-year-old. I was very, very immature. I had no idea what the heck what the world had to offer. Like I said, I grew up in a house where you didn't really talk to your parents and your parents didn't talk to you.
Mhm.
And I didn't really know much. So I learned the hard way. But
Yeah.
what I leaned into was survival, which meant work and a lot of work. So I worked every
Yeah.
job you could imagine, as many jobs as I
Okay.
could find, um,
Hmm.
and just figured out a way to survive. So that gave me some good tools, but it wasn't a path to follow. It was more like I'll find I'm in a hole. I gotta dig myself out of that hole,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I became really good at that, uh, digging myself
Okay.
out of holes that were either self-created or that were a
Yeah.
result of circumstance. And um, I think that was a pattern that I fell into, which is like I
Hmm.
was really comfortable being chaotic, really comfortable having problems,
Okay.
really comfortable being too busy to worry about myself, and
Hmm.
that led me down not the greatest path.
Okay. So whilst that was happening, when you were in the thick of it, were you just were you feeling like in victim mode? Were you blaming? Were you just feeling as if you were sort of nose to the grindstone? Where was your head at during that period of time?
Yeah, that's a great question because it was probably a combination of two of the things you said. One, I figured, well, okay, I got to work harder than everybody else because
Mhm.
had come from such a low point, and
Mhm.
also now I'm behind people who have an education and other things, so I've got
Mm.
to work harder and smarter,
Yeah.
which wasn't a problem. It's just
Mm.
I guess that's genetically who I was. That wasn't a problem. I think, developing a little bit of a chip on my shoulder that it's me against the
Mm.
world. Um,
Okay.
how many bad things could happen to me over and over and
Mm.
over. And, and so I wouldn't say I was, had a lot of self pity, but I
Mm.
certainly had a bit of a chip on my shoulder.
Okay.
And it was like everything was a struggle, everything was a fight, everything was a problem that I had to overcome.
Yeah.
And that just became something that I became super comfortable with. And so
Okay.
as I started to really land on my feet, and when I
Mm.
say land on my feet, I mean, we could fast forward 15 years later, I'm running $120 million in revenue business for a major Wall Street firm with no education, right?
Yeah.
So
Wow.
I was very successful,
Yeah.
but on the other side of it, I was a wreck. Everything in my life was a problem. Like every
Mhm.
relationship was a
Yeah.
horrible relationship. Every
Mhm.
decision I made was one out of chaos, and um, I I uh, I just seemed to encounter every problem that one could encounter, and
Mhm.
it really put me in a bad place.
Yeah. And where was that coming from? Was it you not thinking things through? Was it attracting the wrong kind of people into your life and not, maybe not filtering out the people that didn't have your best interests at heart?
Mhm.
Was it a bit of self-sabotage? What was that all about?
I didn't know going through it, Gemma, but later on, I discovered what the answer to that was, and
Mhm.
where it came from was that I didn't know my place in the world,
Okay.
and nobody had given me any guidance.
Mhm.
Nobody said, "Here's the cause and effect." Nobody
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
"These are the steps you need to take."
Mhm.
It was all out of reaction and all out of chaos, and
Yeah.
so um,
There wasn't a
I just
plan.
there was no plan at all.
Mm.
The only plan was figure out how to survive. And
Yeah.
oftentimes, when you are asking yourself that question, how do I survive? It's out of chaos. It's out of a
Yes.
problem.
Yeah.
How am
Yeah.
I ever going to get through this? How am I going to get past this? How am I going to deal with this? And
Mhm.
they could be little chaoses,
Yeah.
like how am I going to walk into a room full of masters, MBA people, and how am I going to present to them and act like the smartest
Mhm.
guy in the room?
Yeah.
That's chaos.
Yeah.
It's also chaos. Like, why do I keep finding relationships where the person's completely broken and I'm intent on trying to fix them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that kind of self-created chaos. So I think it was just a the inability for me to understand how to make good decisions,
Mhm.
and I think um, that really stemmed from, Gemma, my desire to please others,
Okay.
and I could prove, if I could solve
Yeah.
the problem, I could prove that I'm worthy, right? If
Yeah.
my parents never cared, so I figured
Sure.
everything I tried to do was to get their approval or attention, which
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
worked. So I just
Yeah.
kept trying, and so I think that was a pattern that was real
Mhm.
comfortable. Is I never even could imagine that there was a guy in the mirror. It was all
Mm.
about like the problem or the person or
Mm.
making somebody else happy or trying to fix their problems or,
Mhm.
working doubly hard or whatever I needed to do. It never was
Yeah.
about me because
Yeah.
I didn't have that framework.
Okay. Do you think you ever reached a point where you felt like you had made other people happy? Did you ever achieve it?
It took me a while, but no, the answer is no,
Mm.
until I had this like kind of wake up call.
Mhm.
We talked about it a minute before, we really started talking in that, um, yeah, there was a couple of low points, and
Mhm.
at the lowest point in my life, I realized the answer to your question was absolutely no, including
Mhm.
with me.
Yep.
I didn't make myself happy. I didn't make anybody else happy. And when that time was, Gemma, was I was Yeah, I was successful in business and had some friends, and life wasn't horrible,
Mhm.
but I was in a marriage to an abusive alcoholic who
Okay.
was almost exactly like my mother, and I
Ugh.
didn't know it until I knew it.
Yep.
And then I was overweight.
Mhm.
I was a smoker.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you don't have any money, you could turn to things, right?
Yes.
So I
Yes.
had turned to cigarettes. I was a
Yeah.
smoker for 20 years. I was overweight. I was absolutely stressed out.
Mhm.
I was not active. I had 4-year-old twins at the
Oh,
time,
wow.
and things were starting to get a little unsafe for
Yeah.
them as well as
Yeah.
for me. And it was like every problem that could happen hit me all at once.
Mhm.
And I thankfully got a wake up call that kind of started to turn the dial towards the question that you asked, like, could
Yeah.
I make anybody happy?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
that started to turn the dial because I
Okay.
was really desperate. I was really in a desperate spot.
Tell me about the wake up call.
So the police had been called um, because I mean, we could talk for hours about this, but traditionally, I mean, if you fight one, as a man, I can't hit back,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
I hit one time and that's it,
Yeah.
right? And so I just learned how to take it, and
Mm.
it got really bad, and it's I mean, whatever. Everybody goes through their difficulties, but it was really bad at home, and I was really scared for my kids. And
And so she
uh,
was physically abusive, not just verbally and
yes,
emotionally Yeah.
yeah, I don't think she knew what she was doing, right?
Sure.
I mean, during the time, but
Mhm.
yeah. So it was just bad, and
Mhm.
and there were other things too, but that was pretty much the highlight. And I remember sitting with a friend, and I know this is first world problems, but I had a nice boat. I'm sitting there on my boat with my friend, and I'm just
Mhm.
like literally, broken down. And I just said, listen, Chris, man, I am so freaking tired of everything in my life being a
Mhm.
problem, and I'm so tired of like these bad relationships. And like, when can I get a break? Like,
Yeah.
when can I get a break? Like, when can things start to turn my way? And he goes, man, I've had it with you. And I go, what are you talking about? He goes, I'm so tired of hearing this. He goes, "You got a chip on your shoulder that's so big you can't see anything." He says, "Let me tell you what you do." I go, "What?" He goes, "You walk down the street and you find every little wild animal that you can. And you go, oh, I'm going to fix that wild animal. And you take it
Mhm.
home and you pet it and you feed it and you give it a nice home and you talk
Mhm.
nice to it and you do all the things that you should do to try to fix the problem. And
Mhm.
then you go to pet it and it bites you and you wonder what the hell.
Yeah.
And look, dude, they're wild animals. They bite. That's what they do. I don't care what you do. Why don't you go home, look in the mirror, and figure out what your problems are? Why do you keep finding problems? Why do you have to find chaos?
Yeah.
Why are you always fighting uphill? Why do you have such a chip on your shoulder? Why don't you look in the mirror and find out what your problems are?"
Mhm.
And I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably heard that a million times or seen
Yeah.
it a million times. I should have been smart enough to know it, but I wasn't
Yeah.
until I was. And then it hit me, and I'm just like, wow, man.
Was
I
it
mean,
because he was a friend of yours and that's not the sort of conversation that you would expect to be having with a close friend? You know,
yeah,
very often we sort of like, you're my friend, therefore you're my ally.
yeah.
You're
Oh,
gonna
absolutely.
you're gonna back me up here, even if I'm making a terrible decision, kind of a thing. So it must have
I
been
was
quite
ready to take him to the mat. Yeah, I was like, "What are you kidding me? My fault. How
oh,
dare you? This is not
yeah.
me. This is them."
Yeah.
And I mean, think about it. When you're at work and life, and everybody has like a blame for what's
Mhm.
happening to them,
Yep.
and my blame was everything else and everybody else and
Yeah.
every bad piece of luck and every cosmic joke that was being pulled on me. Everything that bad that was happened
Yeah.
was had everything to do with everyone else and everything else, and not me.
How long did it take you to digest that message that he'd given you? Was it kind of like, hmm, and then, go home, ruminate on it a little bit, it sinks in? Yeah, how long did it take?
It's a great question. It happened immediately, but it
Okay.
took me a long time to understand it.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that was a beautiful process
Yeah.
understanding it. But immediately it hit me because I mean, listen, we all have a wake up call. Sometimes a wake up
Sure.
call is a slap in the face.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I never heard it before that, Gemma, but
Mhm.
it never entered my consciousness that I was the problem, that I
Yeah.
could fix me, and that'll be the first step I need to take to
Yeah.
fix everything else. I just
Mhm.
never even thought about that. It just
Mhm.
wasn't in my consciousness. And you could, I don't know, if anybody's listening, sometimes you look back on your life and you go, man, was I stupid? Like, what the hell was I thinking? Right? Like,
Yeah.
how come I didn't understand that years before?
Yeah.
Right. But you just don't. You just know what you know and you know it. So I literally at that exact time, within about a 2 week period, I got my kids and I to safety. It might have
Okay.
been a week before that, it might have been a
Yeah.
week after. I don't know. But within that time frame, I got me and my kids to safety, and I had the leverage I needed to make sure that there wasn't going to be a big to do about getting divorced and all of that.
Mhm.
Um, and I knew that um, that my life was going to be okay, right?
Mhm.
Like that was a problem that needed to be solved, and it was solved. And I probably look like an idiot, Gemma, but I remember at that time, like putting my kids to bed. They were only 4, not quite 5 yet, and I walked into the bathroom, and I looked in the mirror, and I just started talking to myself.
Mhm.
And I said, man, what if he's right? Like, what if you're the problem? Like,
Yeah.
what the hell? And I just talked to myself for like an hour,
Mhm.
maybe longer.
Yeah.
And I listed to myself all the things that I could be proud of and all the things I liked. And I
Mhm.
listed all the things I didn't like, which is a brutal exercise
Yeah.
if you're going to be brutally honest with yourself. And I said,
Mhm.
look, man, you're unhealthy.
Mm.
You're stressed out.
Yeah.
You always try to fix other people's problems, which you can't. What
Yeah.
makes you think you're so great that you can fix other people's problems? You can't.
Mm.
Why don't you stop smoking? Like, why
Yeah.
don't you get healthy? Why don't you know? And I just listed all of these things. So it was pretty quick. It was like a wake up call because I went, man, okay, I'm the problem.
Yeah.
And that started the process.
Okay. And so some of the resolution of those problems were probably more like longer term commitments, like losing weight. And I guess some stuff you might have had the option to just switch it off or switch something else on instead. How long overall did that dissecting, changing, decoding, how long did that take?
It took a couple of years
Yeah.
because I learned a lot of new lessons. But one of the amazing things about life is that, especially if you encounter difficulty, is you learn a lot of lessons. I mean, you learn some valuable lessons, you learn some valuable tools, you learn valuable leadership skills, you
Mm.
have some perspective. Um, I mean, if everything's handed to you on a silver spoon, that's great. But if
Sure.
things get difficult, you don't have the tools.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
you're used to everything being difficult, when things are difficult, you're cool,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But the the thing is I figured out during that talk with myself that I learned 100 valuable lessons in life, but I missed one key, and that
Mm.
is how to apply them to myself.
Right.
I
Yeah.
could run a business. I could lead other people. I could be a good friend. I could do all these things. I could employ those lessons to help others or to help my situation, but I
Yeah.
didn't know how to apply them to me.
Yeah.
So it was it was this thing where, standing in the mirror, saying, okay, maybe the guy looking back matters more than everybody else.
Mhm.
Maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
And if he does, then what do you need to do that's healthy and positive and can help you on a path towards your best life? And what can you do to put yourself in a position of happiness and all of these things that I was like, wow, okay. And it started with that honest discussion. But the next thing I had to do, Gemma, was I had to just forgive myself and
Mm.
just let free my mind a little bit and go, all right, you're an idiot. You
Yeah.
made a whole lot of bad decisions. You wasted a whole lot of time. You're in
Yeah.
a bad position now, but just you didn't know, man. Just
Mm.
like give it up. Like
Yeah.
just don't beat yourself up. Just make today the first day. That was really the key for me, was to
Mm.
just cut myself a break. We're so mean to ourselves in our head,
Yeah. Oh,
especially if we
yeah.
make a bad
Yeah.
decision, right?
Yeah. 100%. So it sounds from what you're saying there, being honest with yourself was a key part of the process.
Mhm.
Um, valuing your self-esteem, making that a priority was a key part of the process. Forgiving yourself was a key part of the process.
Mhm.
Do you think there was anything else that was important as you started to make that transition? Like if someone were gonna model this from you and they're like,
Yeah.
wow, his situation sounds just like mine. Like, what are the steps? What do I need to
Yeah.
do? Are there any other elements or aspects that you think are really important in that journey?
Yeah, and I didn't know it going into it, but I knew it after I'd kind of really made a really great transition. And we could talk about what that looked like for me. It might not look like that for anybody else, but it was that honest, brutal assessment, the giving yourself the ability to just let go, just free your mind, forgive
Mhm.
yourself, just walk away. Like today's day
Yeah,
one. Forget about it, right? It's
yeah,
not I'm gonna do something one day. This is day one. Like boom.
sure.
The third part was this like unending optimism and excitement to find out like what's on the other side of me. Like
Nice.
what is that? And it was a process to learn that. I'll give you an example. Okay. So I stopped smoking in what was February of that year.
Mhm.
In March, I ran a 5K. So imagine a guy that's, I don't know, kilograms, 30K overweight and been a smoker
Okay.
for 20
Yeah,
years. Um,
yeah,
I couldn't run down the block. And 5 weeks later, I
sure.
ran a 5K. And then I did
Yeah.
a 10K. And then I did
Wow.
a little triathlon. And by July, I said, man, I'd love
Mhm.
to do something called a half Ironman. And
Right,
half
yeah,
Ironman is a big event, right? It's a
sure.
hard event. It's a long
Yeah,
event. But swim,
yeah,
bike, and runs, nearly 110K or something
mhm,
between the three sports. So
yeah.
I go to this event, I sign up for it, I do my training. I've never done anything like this. I never come close to anything like this. And I roll up to the start line. I park my car and I get out and I start looking around and I'm like, Gemma, holy crap. Everybody here's like a Greek god and goddess. Like they're beautiful. They're in tone, they're in shape, they're freaking athletes. And I'm just this fat kid. I'm not a kid anymore, but I'm just this fat guy.
Yeah,
Like I don't belong here. What the hell am I doing? And I walk around and I'm just like, oh my God, you're such a loser. You don't belong here. Like, what the
wow.
hell? And everybody's got to be looking at you thinking, what's that guy doing here? And so I almost got back in my car. I
Yeah.
almost did and went home and said, okay, that's that. That's not me. But then
Mhm.
I walked to the start line and they were doing a wave start and the gun goes off and all these Greek god and goddesses go swimming. And I'm like, wow, those are real athletes. And I almost turn around to go when I leave and I look at the beginning and there is a dude back uh, swimming on his back, flopping around. There's somebody else swimming in circles
Yeah.
and there's another person that's scared to jump in the water and they don't care. Like they're just doing the best that they can do for them. They could care less. Because if that was me, man, I would be so self-conscious. They don't even care. Like they're just trying to do the best they can do. And I go,
Yeah.
oh, you mean that's okay? Like
Mm,
nobody's judging you, nobody cares. Like just go out there and do what you need to do.
mhm.
And so um I did the race and I finished and nobody cared and nobody was watching, but I knew now what I could do, which
Yeah,
was awesome.
yeah.
And then I did a full Ironman and then I decided to go run 50K and then I ran 70K and then I ran uh 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 100K and then I did 150K run and then I
Wow.
did multi-day bike rides and I eventually did a 8,000K solo bike ride. I just did all this
That
crazy
sounds amazing.
stuff because I was optimistic. Like, man, if I could do that, why can't I do this?
Yeah,
If I
yeah,
could do that, why can't I do this? If I could, instead of trying to fix a problem, why don't I walk away from a problem? How cool is that?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I just that the process, I know it's a long answer, but the process was a couple of years
yeah,
of that beautiful finding out what I could do and what I'm
yeah.
all about.
So how important were the goals that you were setting?
I didn't set any goals. What I
Okay.
did was I said, why don't you go do something and then
Uh-huh.
figure it out? And if I did it, I'm like, oh, you obviously set your sights too low.
Right.
So why don't you try something else? And
Yeah,
that's a little bit harder. And if you can
sure.
do that, then well, geez, wow, you didn't set your sights high enough.
Mm,
And then
yeah.
you could do that. Like, here's a guy who I literally could not run across the street.
Uh-huh.
And I did 3 Ironmans and 2 50-mile runs in 1 year.
That's
It's like,
mad good.
I mean, are you kidding me? Like at my age and raising two kids by myself and running a very large business
Yeah.
and having friends and what dealing with the financial crisis. I don't,
Yes.
and at the same time, my sister was going through her cancer. So
Right.
so I mean, yeah, that's a lot on your plate, but I'm like, wow, I certainly didn't set my goals high enough.
Yeah.
Now I way didn't set them higher earlier in life.
Yeah.
Like I got to make up for all those bad decisions.
What did it do for you on a sort of mental and emotional level? When that stuff was happening and you were achieving these things,
Mhm.
were you being nicer to yourself? Were you acknowledging those achievements and did you believe them?
It took a while. Um, I've never been a fan of people that brag a lot. I've never been a
Uh-huh.
fan of people that put a spotlight on them.
Mhm.
And so I didn't want to be a hypocrite and start doing that, but I did it inside.
Okay.
I started to change that internal voice,
Yes. Yeah.
and it wasn't I didn't consciously do it. It just started to happen
Sure.
that it was like, you mean I'm allowed to feel good about myself? Do you mean
Mhm.
I'm allowed to be proud? I'm
Yeah.
allowed to like know that I did something that was positive and then feel some reward inside about that.
Yeah.
So those weren't conscious thoughts, but that's what started to happen. And it's
Yeah.
kind of amazing how um with a quiet confidence you can become a new person
Mhm.
and rewire that negative voice in your head.
Yeah.
That's not, I mean, I if there's a number, I probably told myself I'm a loser 5 billion times, right? Because when something bad happens, you're like, oh, you're such an idiot. Why? Oh, you're such an idiot. Like, oh, can't believe it. Oh, you're such an idiot. I
Yeah.
might have done that countless times. And then all of a sudden you start to do something that you can be proud of, even if it's something as simple as running across the finish line.
Mhm.
And then you go, okay, well, maybe I'm not a loser. You go,
Yeah.
or you go, wow, that was cool. Or,
Yeah.
hey, man, you set out to do something and you did it. Good for you. That's the opposite of calling yourself a loser 5 billion times. So it takes a while, but internally I did that. And that has made all the difference in the world and the way I view myself and the way I view the world for sure.
Mhm. And as these new things were happening, this new voice was happening, did you see that there was a positive effect on other areas of your life? So you had your business by this stage. Like, was there an impact there? Was there an
Mhm.
impact on your relationships? Where else did it ripple out to?
Yeah, pretty much everywhere.
Mhm.
And it's still a work in process. I mean, this is 20 years later, right? It's still a work in process, but I am substantially better
Mhm.
at making good decisions.
Yeah.
I am substantially better at letting not trying to think of myself as the guy that's going to solve the problems because
Mhm.
I can't solve the problems, man. They're
Yeah.
what wild animals are going to be wild animals. They don't know any better, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I tend to not be drawn to
Mm.
being the solution. I tend to not be drawn to thinking that I'm the guy that can fix the problem, right? Because I
Yeah.
can't, right? And so it definitely made me a better father. It
Yeah.
made me a better friend. Made
Mhm.
me a better picker of friends. It
Yes.
made me
Yes.
a better partner. Made me a better picker of partners. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, it permeated pretty much every area of my life for sure.
And how do you deal with it now if you have a wild animal that crosses your path, who's in need of, looks like they would be good recipients of some kind of help or support? How do you deal with that differently now?
Yeah, it's good insight. I tend to realize now as opposed to before, right? When you grow up in a house where, I did ABC and I would come home and
Mhm.
my mom would be happy. And the
Yeah.
very next day I would do ABC and I would come home and my mom would be exceptionally angry and violent, right?
Mhm.
And so if you're not safe, you're like, holy crap, I gotta always be aware of all the china that's around me because it might break at any time, and I gotta always be alert, right?
Mm.
Because the world might come crashing down. Like I gotta stop that from happening, and that's the way I live my life. And so when I didn't need to do that anymore, I realized, hey, you know what? I didn't put the crystal on the shelf over there. If it falls down and breaks, that's its problem, right? Like I didn't have to be so self-conscious of everything around me is gonna break and I gotta be the one to fix it, right? Because it's not that way. It's just the world doesn't revolve around me, and it's not all because of me, and it's not all my fault, and it's not my responsibility to make everybody and everything, okay. And it took a
Yeah.
long time to learn that. And so um I'm better at recognizing that
Mm.
the world goes around, everybody's living their lives, everybody's dealing with their problems, and I got nothing to do with it. And they got nothing to do with me. And now that's not 100% true, right? We have good relationships and
Sure.
we interact and we care about people.
Yeah.
Um, but really, it's just taking. I learned how to take myself out of the center of everything because
Yeah.
I wasn't the center of everything.
Yeah. And I'm curious as to what happened with your relationship with your parents as a result of these changes that you went through. Where were they by this stage?
That never got fixed.
Okay.
Um, by the time I was 18, my dad was nearly 80, and that was a very old. Yeah, it was
Yes.
very old back then. I mean, 70 late 70s was very old back in back 50 years ago, 40 years ago. So so he was really old. He ended up passing away when I was 23, and we
Okay.
never really had any relationship growing up because he was how do you relate to somebody that's nearly 60 years older than you
Yeah.
as a father
And
son,
did they
especially.
stay married? Did your parents stay together?
They did until I was about until my sister and I were small teens.
Okay.
Then you started to see there's a big difference. What
Yeah.
now there's just not an age difference. One's very young and one's very old.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
old comes with problems, and young, especially if you're angry and bitter, comes with a whole nother set of problems.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, um, it's not hyperbole to say my mom just didn't like kids. She really didn't like kids. And um, yeah, I don't think she's missed not having a relationship with me for a minute of her life. And that's, it is what it is. But
Yeah.
he passed away when I was 23, and she's still alive, but honestly, she hasn't reached out to me in decades and decades and decades. So,
Wow. Wow.
yeah.
Okay. And are you at peace with that? Would you ever want that to be different?
Of course, I'd wish that it was different, but I am at peace with it, and
Mm.
it took a lot for me to become at peace with it. And the
Yeah.
analogy that I can give is, so I'm going to fast forward to something. I was doing a this 8,000 8,000K bike ride
Right.
in only 45 days, a solo bike ride. It was part of a book project I was working on.
Mhm.
And I was biking solo across the country, basically from California to Florida and then up to New York. If you know the States, it's a long way.
Yeah.
And I was in Florida, which is where she lives. And I knew I was going to be biking within a stone's throw of her where she lived.
Hmm.
Um, and I thought, you know what? She's not going to care. She's never going to know. And no way in the world would I ever stop by. What am I going to say? Hi, I'm the guy you didn't want to talk to for the last 40 years. So, um, I got this analogy in my head. I was biking in the middle of the night down this lonely highway in Florida, and I got this analogy, and I just became at peace with it using this analogy. And I said, look, man, at this point in your life, like you were given a 10,000 piece puzzle, which is a freaking hard puzzle to put together. And you put a lot of it together. You're like 8,000 pieces in, and you're
Hmm.
starting to look around and you're going, uh-oh, there's a piece or two missing.
Hmm.
Ah, shit. Like you dropped a piece.
Yeah.
Somebody's took a piece. There's some pieces missing. So what do? Do you return it to the manufacturer? Can't do
Hmm.
that, right?
Yeah.
Can you order a new box? Can't do that.
Hmm.
So just continue to put the puzzle together and just realize there's going to be some missing pieces. Oh well.
Yeah.
Focus on
What's
the
there?
pieces that are there, not the few holes that are there. So it was this analogy where I was just like, yeah, I'd like it to be different.
Hmm.
But you know what? I'm a 10,000 piece puzzle. There's only a couple pieces missing. I'm pretty freaking lucky. And I'm proud of the books that I've wrote. And a couple of them were big projects and I think have made an impact. So I think I'm proud of those things too.
Yeah. Tell me about the books.
Well, the most recent one, because we've only been talking about it a little bit, was called Cycle of Lives. I'll give you the quick background on it. Was that when I finally saw this endless road ahead of me, Gemma, like this I'm like, wow, you mean I can be healthy and I can care about myself? And I'm just like, it's my world's like endless ahead of me. Like, this is day one. Oh, sweet, bring it on. Like, I'm so excited. Right then, like in that same 2 week period I was talking about before, my sister called me up and said, hey, I've got terminal brain cancer. And out of our, you know, horrible childhood, she was happily married, great friends, really had evolved to a wonderful person. So her journey now was going to be very short, and
Yeah.
mine was very endless, and it was pretty stark. And I recognized through interacting with her during that time that people were really good. I don't care if it's a doctor, the
Mhm.
patient, a caregiver, a loved one, that people are really good about dealing around the tasks around their cancer, but they're
Mhm.
not good at talking about the emotional side of their traumas.
Okay. Yeah.
The emotional, how does it feel? Right.
Yeah.
Like, I can tell you how to find a better doctor and how to navigate the healthcare system, but to sit down with you and say, yeah, geez, how does it feel? What are you going through? Talk to me. That's hard to do.
Yeah.
And I have never met anyone that doesn't have some amount of difficulty with connecting with people on the emotional side about severe trauma like that. And I
Yeah.
thought, I thought to myself, like, why is that? Like, why do we have such
Mm.
a hard time talking about difficult things like that? And so I embarked on this project to find these fascinating, amazing people, uh, oncologists and medical professionals, patients, survivors, loved ones, somebody that lost a parent, somebody that lost a child, you name it. And I just interviewed them about their
Okay.
traumas and
Yeah.
what is it about your life that allowed you to connect with people, or what is it about your life that inhibited you, prevented you from
Okay.
connecting with people at their most needed time or at your most needed time? And I didn't come up with any answers. I don't know if I had any answers, but I wanted to shine a light on that. I'll tell you what happened during the financial crisis. I was working at this major Wall Street firm, and I had one of my employees uh, took a horrible exit and decided to jump off the building.
Right.
Couldn't handle it.
Mhm.
And clearly he needed to seek professional help and hadn't.
Yeah.
Young family, young kids, it's just absolutely tragic.
Yeah.
And I had about 50 employees on site, and I walked into each person's office and I said, "Oh my gosh, can you imagine what it must have been like for him?" And every single person, Gemma, every single one
Mm.
had a first person experience who goes, yeah, I can't understand what it's like. I mean, when I was a kid, my uncle this, or when I
Mhm.
was a kid, my best friend in this, or when I was a kid, my dad, or and
Yeah.
I'm just like, what the hell?
Yeah.
These are people I've worked with for years. I've
Mhm.
been to their weddings. I've been to funerals. I've been to barbecues. I've had them at my house. I've
Yeah.
gone on vacations with them. And I didn't know that they had dealt with something that freaking serious. Why? Because we don't talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, why is that? And so I just kept running into people over and over and over. Oh, I can take care of my mom while she's in hospice, but yeah, we don't really talk about it,
No.
right? Or I love taking care of my patients, but they don't know what I go through emotionally as a doctor. It's like that part of it is so hidden that
Yeah.
I wanted to try to shine a light on it to figure out why. Why is it so hard for us to talk about things on the emotional level, especially with regards to really, you know, big trauma?
And what did you learn about the why? Were there any patterns or anything that you were able to conclude?
Yeah, all the stories are so different. They're all just vastly, wildly different. And they are mostly different because the adolescent, young adult, childhood traumas we go through are severe. I don't care who you are, and I don't care how lucky you are or how unfortunate you are.
Mhm.
Those traumas are severe,
Yeah.
and we carry them around with us. And so it was strange how everybody's story was quite individual,
Mm.
but collectively, they all shared a kind of one thing in common. They're all carrying around a whole lot of baggage.
Yeah.
They all are very unkind with their inside voice regarding
Okay.
things. I mean,
Yeah.
even the oncologist who,
Mhm.
when she was a little girl, her dad one day just never came home and never to be heard from again.
Oh.
Right. So her whole life, she figures she deserves to be abandoned. It's her fault.
Right.
I mean, she probably told herself that 10 million times. It's
Yeah.
always her fault. She's the one that deserves to be abandoned. How do you
Yeah.
rewire that? So I think the common theme is that we all have had trauma, maybe at varying degrees, but they're all severe, and we oftentimes don't develop the tools with how to deal with it. So we just tuck it away inside, and it and
Yeah.
becomes this thing that can eat away at us, and it
Yeah.
affects who we are, especially when it
Mhm.
comes to connecting with people. And
Yes.
and
Yeah.
and if we don't know how to connect with people, we're not going to learn later in life unless we learn how to unpack that crap that's in our head and rewire the box, rewire ourselves. And so, if you take the common thing of everybody's going through something or has gone through something that's really dramatic, if you take the common theme of we don't have the tools to really examine it with other people and in a safe environment with somebody because we're just not used to sharing it because we're used to hiding it.
Yeah.
And you add the fact that we all have emotions. Right. And oftentimes you put in the last ingredient, which is very isolating, very lonely place trauma,
Yeah.
especially later in life.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if this ever happened to you, but I'll say it has. It's happened. Anybody's listening. You're walking down the hallway at work, and somebody goes, "Hey, Gemma," and you go, "Hey, what's going on?" And you go, "Oh, there's something going on. What's happening? Are you okay?" And they go, "Oh, I just found out my cousin's really sick, and I just got this phone call, and I think she might be dying." And you go, "Oh shit, I'm sorry," and you go,
Yeah.
"No," and you go exit because
Yeah.
the heck do you? What are you gonna say?
Yeah.
You just came out of a meeting where you're feeling really good about yourself, and you
Yeah.
just walked into somebody who said their cousin's dying. Man, I got to exit as quickly as I can.
Yes.
What the
Yeah.
hell am I going to say?
Yeah.
And so it's a very lonely, isolating place. And so if you recognize that those things, everybody's an emotional wreck at some
Mhm.
level. Everybody's gone through
Yeah.
trauma. Everybody's so mean to themselves inside, and also whatever they're going through right now that might be acute, it
Mhm.
probably is a pretty lonely place.
Yeah. Do you think that there's any uh, formula for how we can react in that situation that you just gave an example of? Like, what is the right thing for people to do? Because I think unless you're a trained therapist, and then you might have some, some nous about you to be able to ask the right questions, express empathy in the right way. But for the sort of average person, where they're kind of like, "Ugh," like, what do I do with this? I feel like someone's just handed me a grenade and now I'm holding it, and I don't want this exploding on me. So what do I do
Right.
with this thing? What is there a right way to react in those situations?
Easier to answer, is there a wrong way to react in those
Okay.
situations?
Yeah.
Yes, because I don't know that I have the answers. I am not a therapist. I'm not a professional. I'm just a guy who talked to a lot of people about this, right? So I can tell you what the wrong way is. The wrong way is sympathy,
Mm-hmm.
because people don't want sympathy, man. They're
No.
dealing with problems. They don't want your sympathy. It doesn't make it better. Number two, they don't want a solution because you
Mm.
can't give it to them.
No.
Right? And a guy like me, back to old me, that's all I would do is try to be a solution,
Yes.
right?
Exactly.
But I can't provide the solution. So
Yeah.
there is, in a lot of cases, not a solution.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
don't try to. A three is they don't want it to be compared to,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, oh, your grandmother died. I know, my grandmother's so sick. I hope she's okay. It's like, oh yeah, okay. No, your grandmother dying and my grandmother
Yeah.
being sick have nothing in common. Like, don't compare
Sure.
the two.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's a good place to start. The
Mm-hmm.
the other thing is I'd say one right thing to do is to realize that you probably, if you mean it and you're coming from a place of authenticity and you're grounded and you're real, you probably can't say the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You probably can't ask the wrong question.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. You could probably identify with this. Okay. My sister's dying of brain cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Dying of brain cancer. She's gonna leave her husband and kids behind, right? I can't even imagine the stuff that she's going through and the stuff that she's feeling. Okay. I'm at work one day. She calls me up and I pick up the phone and I go, "Hey, June, how's it going?" And then the first thing I do is go, "Oh my God, are you an idiot? How
Yeah.
in the world could you ask her, how's it going?
Mm.
Like, what do you mean, how's it going? Like,
Mm.
what do you think? How do you think it's going?
Yeah.
She's dying. She's, and she goes, "Oh, hey, I'm fine. Anyway, da 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 da." And it's like the mental anguish that I went through by asking a simple question of how you doing.
Yeah.
It didn't even phase her. It didn't even come into her mind. You probably can't say the wrong thing. We are so afraid of saying the wrong thing, of doing the wrong thing, of not being in the right. It's not about that. You know what it's about? It's just caring and being present.
Yeah.
And if you say the wrong thing, they're going to let you know.
Yes.
Most likely, not
Yeah.
saying something is the wrong thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And I guess just making yourself available, for people that are in difficult situations, making yourself available. And sometimes you really don't need to say very much at all. Most of the time
Right.
it's just listening.
Yeah. I mean, every single person that went through, and again, I talked to many, many, many people,
Mm.
different kinds of cancer, different ages, different perspective.
Mm.
You know, one lady had cancer 5 different times in her life. You know, one person was just afraid of cancer, right?
Mm.
Um, every single person had this kind of common theme that they had been abandoned, or their best friend all of a sudden disappeared. Their
Yeah.
college roommate all of a sudden wouldn't return a phone call. Like their fiance hung up the phone and said, "I can't take care of you. This is not me." Like,
Yeah.
full on abandonment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's so lonely and isolating. And sometimes it's I'm going through something difficult, and so I put on a face and I tell everybody else, "No, I don't need anything," and I disappear. So it can be lonely that way too. But it's a very lonely place. So what you said was really there. Just be present.
Mhm.
Just be there for them. And
Yeah.
which is hard. It's hard to do because if you're just there to listen and to talk about what's going on, it can be a very uncomfortable position.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And um I don't like the fact that I'm going to say this, but I'm going to say it. It's an investment of time that people very often don't feel like they have, because people feel so busy these days, right?
I guarantee you 100% there's not a single person that could be listening to the show right now
Mm.
that doesn't have a friend that's going through something
Mm.
very traumatic, a
Yeah.
divorce, a separation, um, kids going off college,
Mm.
fired from a job, going through something physical. There isn't a person here that doesn't have that person in their life, and
Yeah.
you've kind of not been able to make time for them, and you haven't
Yeah.
called them, and you haven't returned their phone call, and now it's been so long that you're afraid to call.
Yeah.
And what the hell do you say? Because you said you were going to be there, and 5 weeks later you haven't been there. So how can you be there now? Because then they're going to hate you. And
Yeah.
every single person has, if you think about it, and I do that every once in a while. I go, "Who do you know?" And then I go, "Oh shit, I haven't spoken to so and so. I got to give them a call and ask them how they're feeling."
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard, man. It's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's great that you've made that almost like a sort of conscious part, a conscious ritual for yourself to make sure that you're making yourself available for those people, because otherwise, time just slides. And one minute it's New Year, the next minute it's the 11th of April. So
Yeah,
it just slides by otherwise.
for sure. And look, I used to think, well, I'll call them and make it better, or I'll jump in on the problem and try to solve it. But now
Mhm.
I just go, "You're not going to solve any problems. You're not going to make them feel any better. How about this? If you could have had an awareness earlier in life that somebody cared, like you really
Mhm.
believe they cared, how much more ahead in life would you be right now?" I just never believed anybody cared. I certainly didn't care about me, but I definitely didn't believe anybody else cared.
Yeah.
And um, wow, man, when somebody shows you that they really care, it's really deep. It's really touching. It's really powerful.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even if you're only present for a few minutes,
Mhm.
just to let that person know that you actually really care.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you're
100%.
just there to show you care is a
Yeah.
big deal, man. It's a big deal when people are going through difficult things, because one of the things they all think about is,
Mm.
"Hey, man, you know what? Nobody cares. I'm just living my life and nobody cares." But
Yeah.
how could they? I mean, don't you just get super annoyed? we've seen it in the movies 100 times, but don't you get super annoyed when you're trying to explain a problem to somebody and then just keep their answer keeps saying, oh, it's all going to work out. Oh, there's always a
Mhm.
reason for it. Oh, I'm sure everything's going to be fine. No, it's not going to be fine.
Yeah.
Like, no, it's going to work out. You'll see. It's going to work out. No, it's not.
Mm.
And so sometimes I think I don't like the fakeness of that. The reality
Sure.
is sometimes it doesn't work out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes you got to know when to quit in life and
Mhm.
business and whatever.
Mhm.
And accepting that allows you to be authentic and to connect
Yes.
to people with grace.
Yeah.
And um, I mean, there's a million stories of some of these people that are running through my head right now, but um, just the authenticity, just the realness of the fact that you can be accepting of what's going on
Mm.
and
Mhm.
deal with that. I'll
Yeah.
never forget this one conversation we had. We were sitting on her back porch, and my kids were maybe 7 at the time now,
Mhm.
and her kids were a few years older, and they were bouncing around on one of those little bouncy tumbler things. And she looked at me and she goes, "You know what really sucks?" And I go, "What?" She goes, "I'm never gonna watch them grow old. That really
Mm.
sucks." And I looked at her and I go, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "Well, I mean, I'm definitely gonna die before they're much older, and
Mhm.
I think I'm okay with it. But just the most horrible thing for me is to think that I'm never gonna watch them grow. Like
Mm.
I'm never gonna see them get older." She goes, "And that just
Mhm.
sucks, man." And I looked at her and I'm like, "Yeah, it does. I
Mm.
mean, it sucks." I just that
Yeah.
just we could agree that being authentic and connecting, even if
Yeah.
the reality was right. And so I, I don't know. I don't know if it helped her. I don't know if it made an impact, but it's certainly a memory that I remember that we
Mhm.
connected, about something real. And so I think,
Yeah.
again, another stupidly long answer to your question, but um, uh, I, I I like optimism. I like the authenticity.
Yeah.
Acceptance is a big
Mhm.
one, and we don't get a chance to connect with people, truly connect with people, even if for just a minute. We don't get a
Yeah.
chance to truly connect with people. And if you can just stop for just a minute and just
Mhm.
go, okay, I see you, I hear you. I'm gonna
Yeah.
be here. I'm gonna be present for even for just a
Mhm.
moment. It could really make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And gives people that acknowledgement, I hear you, I see you, respect your experience. And I think that authentic kind of conversation is it's just more honest. We're
Yeah.
not lying about what the situation is to try and make ourselves feel better because lying to yourself never makes you feel any better anyway.
It never does. Eventually it catches up with you. I mean, eventually
Exactly.
it catches up with you.
Yeah, yeah. So where are you now in life?
Oh, well, I still balance work, writing books,
Hmm.
being a good parent when I can. I mean, they're grown now, so they don't need parenting, but whatever.
Yeah.
Um, I just do a lot of things. I still do endurance athletic events. I just did a half Ironman last Saturday, and I'll keep
Wow.
doing crazy things. I just
Yeah.
I'm doing the World Championship Hawaii Ironman next year, and excuse me. So I'm staying active, and I'm still trying to figure out where my limits are, which
Hmm.
is great. And I'm still writing books and um, still trying to talk. Yeah, I do expressive writing workshops. So I help
Okay.
people, cancer organizations,
Hmm.
other organizations that deal with trauma. I try to
Yeah.
teach people how to rewire, how to have a different
Okay.
conversation with themselves,
Yeah.
how to be nicer, how to reframe that conversation so that
Mhm.
they can get some benefit. There's some really good benefits from expressive writing,
Yeah.
and I try to empower people with some tools on how to write better, so that you can have a
Okay.
better conversation with that inside voice. I mean, when you think about how
Yes.
mean we are to ourselves, and then you write it
Yeah.
out, and you're like, "Whoa,
Mhm. Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
realize I was that mean to myself." And then if
Yeah.
you read it out loud, you're like, "Whoa." Like
Yeah.
people are really not in touch with that inside voice. So I try to teach them
Mhm.
how to do that. So I do
Yeah.
that a lot. Yeah, I just stay super busy.
Yeah, nice. It's super interesting you say about the expressive writing. So I don't know where I came across this. Might have been somebody else's podcast. They were talking about how I think it was around journaling specifically, and that it doesn't work as well if you type it out as if you handwrite it, because when you handwrite it, you're slowed down, you're naturally slowed down because you can
Mhm,
only write so fast. So it causes you to perhaps think through what you're going to write a little bit more. um,
mhm.
and it's maybe coming from a slightly more mindful place, whereas people can learn to type super quickly, but then they're not sort of filtering the information that's coming out in the same way. So I was curious about your thoughts on that, and whether you would have a preference if you were teaching someone something like
Yeah.
expressive writing, about the how they do it.
Yeah, my preference is the how is really, really, really important.
Mm,
So writing it out by hand is
yeah.
important. It's not the most
Yep.
important thing, but it's important.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I try to give them tools such as how to talk about emotion rather than action.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have really good. In fact, I'm doing an expressive writing workshop tonight for a cancer organization, and
Yeah.
this is maybe the 10th in a series I've done for them, and now
Mm-hmm.
they're very good at understanding how to write emotion and not action.
Okay.
Right?
Give me an
Instead,
example of that. What might that sound like?
so instead of describing something, so I would say something like, "Remember the last difficult conversation you had with a friend, and
Mm,
write about it." And I remember one person said, you know, my friend walked into the restaurant. It was really cold, and she sat down and she was cold, and it kind of started like that. Okay.
mhm.
And I said, no, 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 no. You're telling me actions. You're giving me labels on
Yes.
words. What I want you to do is
Yeah.
tell me the feeling about it.
Yeah.
Tell me the feeling. And all of a sudden, the next two or three versions later, she was like, I sat waiting in the restaurant. I
Mhm.
couldn't believe it had been so long since I seen her, and
Mhm.
she was gonna be late.
Mhm.
How important was it that she cared about me? And the first thing she showed
Mhm.
me was that she's late. And
Yeah.
then I was so cold sitting there that I was shivering, and
Mhm.
I was probably close to crying because I was so angry at her being late. And then when she walked in, it looked like she didn't care about me. And she kind of like walked over and sat down, and it looked almost like she didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
And so we talked about, and when she wrote that out that way, and she
Mhm.
read it to the group, she was
Mm.
bawling her eyes out because she
Yeah.
was like this. She was so in touch with her feelings. I remember one, if I could just digress for 1 minute,
Yeah, of
there
course.
was
Yeah,
one
yeah.
that was so beautiful because she couldn't talk about the emotion. And I finally got her a
Mhm.
place where she could talk about the emotion of it. And
Mhm.
so her story went something like this, and it's not word for word, but it was so beautiful. She went, um, I'm so angry at this person. My,
Mhm.
you know, for the last 20 years, I have been listening to this person, right? And at my most needed time, I didn't listen to them. And I'm so mad because if I would have listened to you, I could probably be alive. If I would have just taken your advice
Mm.
and I would have gone to the doctor sooner, my cancer wouldn't be as bad.
Mm.
And I'm so freaking angry at myself for not listening to you. And I hate myself because I didn't listen to you. I listened to you my whole life.
Mm.
And then I didn't listen to you when I most needed to listen to you. And it's your fault, right? You didn't tell me strong enough to listen to me. You didn't say that. I'm so angry at you. And she read it, and I said, who was your friend? And she said, that was me. Like,
Oh,
why didn't I listen to myself?
yeah.
And she was bawling her eyes out, and she realized she was so angry at herself. And she
Mhm.
didn't realize that. And then all the other people in the support group convinced her, was did she need to forgive herself because
Yeah.
she was just busy. She was living her life. She knew
Yeah.
something was wrong, but she didn't know. You don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just forgive yourself. But she was so angry
Mhm.
at herself for not going to get herself looked at and taken
Mhm.
care of before that, but she had never dealt with it. And when she wrote it out and when she talked about the emotion and when she
Mm.
read it out loud to herself, it was so real and honest and pure. And she got to the point where she was able to forgive herself because
Yeah.
she had to. She
Yeah.
didn't know any better.
Mm.
And that's what expressive writing can do. It can just really
Mm.
let you get in touch with your emotions.
Yeah. Wow, that's such powerful stuff. Is
Yeah.
there like are there frameworks and things that people can follow around this?
Mhm.
What's if people are sort of more interested in it, what's the best way for them to learn more about it?
Yeah, like anything, it's a practice. So if you
Yeah.
want to do anything well, if you want to eat well, if you want to become a cook, if you want to be a musician, if you want to do your makeup right, whatever the hell the thing is that
Yeah.
you got to practice, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So writing, especially writing about things we're not comfortable writing about our own feelings
Yes. Yeah.
in a very descriptive, honest,
Mhm.
pure way, it's
Yeah.
not easy to do. It takes practice, and it's
Of
not really
course.
that hard, but it takes
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's tons of existing. I mean, shoot, you can go online and type expressive writing prompts,
Sure.
and you could just sit down and
Yeah.
do it. But I would suggest if anybody thinks maybe I should look into it,
Mhm.
a lot of local organizations,
Mhm.
especially if you're going through something like cancer or a battered women's shelter or PTSD or a drug addiction places. All of these, if you're going through something really difficult,
Mhm.
they all have programs, and most of them will have programs that revolve around
Yeah.
journaling or expressive writing,
Okay.
and they're literally the most incredible things ever.
Yeah.
I I so look forward to leading these workshops because they're just transformative to people,
Yeah.
you know? I
And
mean,
and what is it that makes it different to verbalizing those things that they might be thinking or experiencing? How is it different that it's done in writing, do you think?
I'll give you a super simple answer to that question, okay?
Mm.
Earlier this year, it was maybe like January 1st or 2nd, my wife was away on business, and I was in the garage working out, and I had a 15K, a 30-pound weight, and I dropped it on my toe,
Oof.
a hex weight, like the
Yeesh.
point of the
Ay, ay, ay.
30K,
Yeah.
15K, 30 pounds, right on my big toe. And I screamed bloody murder for like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And then for the next 2 hours, I said, "Oh, you're such an idiot. Oh, you're such an idiot." Like
Mhm.
I must have said, "I'm an idiot" a
Yeah.
thousand times. Why are you so clumsy? Why didn't you think about this? Why didn't you do this? Because I'm dealing with the pain and it
Yeah.
has to be my fault. And
Yeah.
I'm the one to blame. And I'm
Yeah.
such a dope. And I'm going on and on and on. And I start laughing. I sit down to do some writing. My toe is throbbing. And I'm like, oh, maybe you should write how it's not your fault.
Yeah.
Like you dropped something, big deal. Like you
Yeah.
dropped something. You're
Yeah.
not an idiot, right? It's not your fault.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, a bad occurrence happened. The
Mhm.
outcome was terrible.
Yeah.
And yes, it hurt, but it's not your fault. Like, stop
Mm.
beating yourself up over it. And I'm like, oh shit, I got to take my own medicine because
Yeah.
it's so easy to beat yourself up over it.
Yeah. Yeah,
That
definitely.
just cut yourself a break. And if you really talk about the emotion and you're kind to yourself and you talk
Yeah.
about what happened, you're going to realize it wasn't your fault.
Of course. So do you find um so I've done a lot of self-development, and a bit like your story there with dropping the weight on your foot, I'll have my own sort of equivalent situation, and I'll make myself laugh at the moment when I spot just how bad my self-talk is, and the fact that I've just probably spent the last 8 hours teaching people how to have more positive self-talk. So, in my experience, the ability to beat myself up definitely still exists, but I can spot it faster and I can correct it far more easily than, I didn't even have the skills to correct it in the past. So, I'm curious if for you it's similar in that you can kind of slip back into the old ways, but are probably less inclined to do that, and if
Hmm.
you do, you'll spot it faster and you
Hmm.
can correct it more easily.
No question. And that begins with this process. I know it's dumb to make it this simple, but it begins with the same process of which is transformation, right? Which is
Mhm.
honest assessment,
Yeah.
free your mind, forgive yourself, wasn't your
Mhm.
fault. And
Mhm.
if it was, you didn't know any better. So now you
Yeah.
do. So just
Yeah.
whatever, just free your mind. and then be optimistic that you can do better, that
Mm.
things can work out better, right?
Yeah.
It's a simple formula, but it really works
Yeah.
because honestly, the last time that you beat yourself up,
Mm.
honestly, honestly, I mean, did you beat yourself up for the right reasons? Were you being honest about what happened?
Yeah.
Did you accept the part that you had in it, or accept the fact that you had nothing to do with it? Like,
Yeah.
were you honest about it? Second of all, can you just cut yourself a break? Like,
Mm.
literally,
Yeah.
you were doing your best. You didn't know any better, and now you
Yeah.
do, and you're going to integrate it so that you don't do that same thing
Mm-hmm.
again. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just give yourself a break. Like,
Yeah.
don't cut yourself the same break 100 times, but cut yourself the
Sure.
same break a few dozen times. You don't know, and
Yeah.
then pretty soon you don't have to cut yourself that break anymore. So just free your
Yeah.
mind, and
Yeah.
then be authentic about saying, I'm going to do better.
Yeah.
I'm going to be
Yeah.
nicer. It's going to work out better. I'm going to take
Mm-hmm.
the right steps I need to take, right? Think about if you're on a diet, right? And you go, oh, well, I'm trying to lose weight. Well, actually, no, you're not. If you're sitting around eating a bunch of chocolate, you're not trying to lose weight, but you might
Mm-hmm.
think you are. But like, honestly,
Yeah.
are you? Okay. Honestly, are you? No. So just be honest and just say, okay, I'm not doing as good a job as I could do. I could do better. Second of
Mm-hmm.
all, just forgive yourself. Like, oh, it's not easy. You've been covering up bad eating habits for whatever 100 million bad reasons for how long.
Mm-hmm.
Like, cut yourself a break. It's not easy.
Yeah.
Okay? And then, like, try better. Like just
Yeah.
try better. Don't
Yeah.
walk around going, oh, I'm trying to lose weight, and meanwhile you're eating 10,000 calories a day. No, you're not trying to lose weight. Don't say it.
Yeah.
Don't, be authentic.
I notice how there's a lot of people who have negative self talk, but don't even know that they're doing it until I say, what do you say to yourself in there? And they go, well, it's like la 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 la, and it's all very bad. And I'm like, well, like, is that working out well for you? Like, it's got you to see me, so
Right.
I'm not sure it is. And I think there's a lot of people who are just, it's almost like they're busy doing it. They're not even, they're hearing it, obviously they're hearing it internally, but they're not conscious of it. You know, it's like they're sort of just drifting through life doing what they're doing and not really taking a moment to check in with themselves and go, hey, how's it sounding up here? They're maybe more inclined to do that on a physical level. You know, if there's some kind of physical ailment, you know, they got a bad stomach or something like that, then they can tune into it and go, I wonder what's going on in there, it doesn't feel so good. But then they're not necessarily doing that in their head without me flicking them in
Mhm.
some way.
Right. Yeah. Well, denial and self delusion are two very, very, very powerful tools.
I tend to think as well that the people, you mentioned something there, it triggered something in my mind. The people that say, that's just how I am, it's almost like that's a kind of immaturity, because it's like, it's like saying, well, I can't change it. Therefore, there's nothing I can do about it. So you will have to accept the faults and the flaws that I've got because I can't change myself. And it's like, well, if you can't do it, like, sure as hell nobody else is going to do it for
Right.
you.
Yep. Yeah. I run into that all the time. And it's so funny because, I mean, listen, there's no hiding from the fact that I'm 59 years old, right? I'm almost 60 years old. When my dad was 60, he was old. Okay. At 60, I'm still going to electronic music concerts, and I'm
Yeah,
running Ironmans, and I'm optimistic that my best days are ahead of me, and I'm very fit, I'm very
yeah,
active, and I'm all this stuff.
yeah,
And I run into people all the time that are like, oh, like, oh, I could never do that. Or I would, oh, I could never.
yeah.
It's like, well, I'm not doing it to prove anything. I'm just doing it to
No,
live my best life. And the fact that you're
yes, yes.
40 and you think you're too old to go run a marathon,
Yeah,
that's your problem, because it's not true,
yeah, yeah,
right? And just because, that, oh, you're doing stuff that young people do. No, I'm doing stuff that I do.
yeah,
I don't know what you're talking about. Right.
yeah,
So I'm not a big fan of, like, I understand you got to set limitations on what you can and can't do, what you can and can't
yeah.
accomplish. I know I'm never going to run in the Olympics. Okay. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
That's a limit. I never going to
Yeah,
reach that limit. Okay.
sure.
But there's a million other things I can do. And
Hmm.
I'm just optimistic that pretty much anything
Yeah.
we set our minds to do, we can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't like this. I'm just a jerk and that's just the way it is. Or I'm just overweight. I've
Mhm.
always been fat. So I'm just that way. Or
Mhm.
I'm not an athlete. So why would I ever do any of that? Or I don't like to cook. So I'm never going to be a good cook. Or I don't care what it
Mhm.
is.
Yeah.
If you don't like it and you want it to be better, you absolutely 100% can change it.
Yeah.
100%.
Love that. Yeah. Yeah. So it's really developing a flexibility in mindset, because that fixed mindset, or the stuckness, the state of stuckness, doesn't get anybody anywhere.
No. And I don't like the excuse of oh, it's in the past, right? Oh, I went to listen to a bunch of live music when I was young. That's why I'm not going to do that anymore. That's for young people. It's like, shut up, right? Right? Shut up. So yeah, I missed out on a lot of things when I was younger, but I
Mhm.
did a lot of stuff too. But I don't
Yeah.
frame it that way. I don't look backwards. I mean, if we're
Sure.
in a car and we're driving down this endless road, you got
Mhm.
to look ahead, man. You just got to look ahead.
Yeah.
And eventually, sometimes you're forced to take the exit too early. Sometimes.
Mhm.
Eventually, you're
Mhm.
gonna get a flat tire. Just happens.
Yeah.
Eventually, a deer's gonna run across, you're gonna kill an animal. I mean, sometimes bad
Yeah.
things happen. You just gotta
Mhm.
deal with that. But a lot more bad things can happen if you're looking in the rear mirror, right? If you're looking
100%.
forward,
Yeah.
I just feel like it's just what I call it. I call it intentionally optimistic. I like to be
Mhm.
intentionally optimistic.
Yeah.
Right. I'm
Nice.
I'm not a Pollyanna. I'm
Uh-huh.
not I'm definitely a realist, but I'm just intensely optimistic. Like, oh,
Mhm.
you don't like scary movies? Let me show you a scary movie that you might like. Because who doesn't like
Yeah.
scary movies in general? Like, oh, I don't like fish. Really? Really? Like all fish, really? Like I'm optimistic. There's something out there because 2 billion people eat fish every day. So I'm sure that, for sure there's something out there that you're gonna like.
Yeah.
Right? Oh,
Yeah.
I just don't do this. I just could never be that. I could never get this degree. I could never learn this instrument. No, wrong.
Mhm.
You can. You absolutely
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. So for you, coming up, what are the things that you are most optimistic about?
Well, it didn't start out this way,
Mhm.
right? Because I was not very optimistic about a lot of things. But
Mhm.
um, yeah, I'm just optimistic that I can continue to learn.
Yeah.
I can always do better. I can always
Mhm.
be better. I could be kinder to myself. I
Yep.
can make better decisions. I could still accomplish things that, mm, I probably had no business thinking I could accomplish. So
Mhm.
I'm just, those are some of the things, but I just, I think framing to me is like if we believe that we have this one life and this is it, and it could be taken away at
Mhm.
any time. If you
Mhm.
believe that, and I don't walk around thinking that all day every day, but I believe that.
Mhm.
And so if you have a chance to live your best life, if you have a chance to
Yep.
care about the person in the mirror, if you're a good person and you're doing enough to care about other people and you're trying to be the best you, I mean, geez, like what more is there? Like really, what
Yeah.
more is there? So all my optimism is wrapped around those thoughts.
Love that. That's so beautiful. If our audience would like to reach out to you, what is the best way for them to do it?
You can reach me directly. The good thing about that last book, certainly can't do this with all books, but with the last book, 100% of the proceeds go to support the cancer organizations that were chosen by the participants of the book. So
Oh, wonderful.
I interviewed these people for a couple of years, got super deep into their stories, wrote 15 different stories. And then
Yeah.
in between the story is the narrative of my bike ride where I went to go
Mhm.
meet them all for the first time. And then the
Right.
people I met along the way and the stopped at some
Okay.
cancer centers and hospitals, that kind of stuff. And the book is not about cancer. It's about the human condition and emotions and how
Mhm.
we can connect and that type of stuff. But 100% of the proceeds go to support the cancer focused organizations and hospitals and other things that they chose. Um, and I talk about that on the website. I have other books. I,
Mhm.
I talk about my expressive writing workshops. So if you go to cycleoflives.org,
Mhm.
cycleoflives.org, or just look up David Richman, and books are available on Amazon. It's the audio book, it's the Kindle book, whatever.
Yeah.
Barnes and Noble. In fact, I did a podcast early on when the book came out. It was the sweetest note. This podcaster was in Scotland, and I got a sweet note, an email from somebody who said, I've been into 5 bookstores and I haven't found your book. And I went, oh my God, how sweet is that? That she wrote me a note saying she wanted my
Yeah.
book. And she actually went into 5 different bookstores. How sweet is that? So I sent her a book and we made sure that now we got the books in the bookstores there. So
Amazing. That's
yeah.
so great. Do you think you'll keep writing? Are you going to write until you run out of words?
Yeah. The bummer is that there are more words than there are time.
Yeah.
So I won't ever run out. I'm working on about 5 or 6 different books right now.
Woof. That's
Uh,
a lot.
it's a lot. It's a lot. And I'm the proverbial, the joke, who on the street is the writer, right? You know which one in your neighborhood is the writer. And you go, how do you know which one's the writer? And you go, because their lawn is the best manicured, their house is the cleanest, the fridge is the most organized, right? Because they do everything but
Yeah.
right. So,
Yeah.
but I try to write every day, and I work on my projects, and hopefully lots and lots and lots of books to come.
Yeah, amazing. How have you found the experience of chatting with me today?
Awesome. Awesome. Very, very cool. I'm really glad we had a chance. Your questions are great. They're well thought out, very authentic. I mean, clearly you're out there to try to help people, and what's not to admire about that?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Everything you shared today has been top notch, really good advice, super useful stuff. And even for the bits that I've come across in different paths that I've trodden on before, it's always so good to hear this stuff and to hear it from a different voice or said with a different story, because it just gets it in there, gets it to resonate on a whole other level. Yeah, and there's some new stuff for me to go out and put into action. I really love how um alive you are. I don't really know how else to say it, but the idea of I'm still learning, I'm still moving, if I'm here, then I'm doing something with my time, really appeals to me. And on a personal level, I think I have a similar sort of disposition, but I also have a lot
Mhm.
of people in my life who will say, can you just sit down for 5 minutes? Can you just calm down? And it's because I think that, you get sometimes people are sort of comparing their output to your output, and maybe
Yeah.
it's making them feel as if it's sort of putting them to shame in some ways. And so I always really like it when I meet a like-minded person who's like, no, no, just keep going.
Right.
Keep living, keep moving, keep
Yeah.
learning, because I'm of a similar sort of mindset.
Yeah. And we forgive people who say, "Oh, I can never do this," or "I can never." Why is it not okay for you to keep moving and being as busy as you
Mm,
want to be and be as optimistic and have your hands in as
mm,
many pies as possible
yeah,
and end up every day completely exhausted? Maybe that's the
yeah,
best thing for you.
yeah,
That's honestly who you want to be. Excuse me. And you're trying to live your best, most authentic, connected life. Why,
mm,
why is that not okay? I
yeah,
think it is.
yeah,
And so I'm like that guy who says, I'll say to my wife, okay, can we just have a movie day? Can we just sit down and watch 3 movies and do nothing else? And then
yeah.
like 20 minutes into the first movie, she's like, why do you look antsy? Relax a little. I'm like, ah, shit, you're right. Oh, thank you, Gemma. I really appreciate it. Thanks for doing what you're doing. I appreciate the times. What really, really wonderful talking to you. And let's stay in touch and figure out how to do this again if it ever makes sense.
100%. All right, what did you think of David? Here are some of my highlights. There was a part towards the end where David said something along the lines of, um, it was about finding out what's on the other side of me. Because we can all have those conversations in the mirror where we see the person that's right there directly in front of us. But the question is, who's behind all of that? What is on the other side of me? And maybe I'm not a loser. Now, I'm not going to say that's the best affirmation. You want to say, maybe I made something great instead. But certainly reaching that point of realization of maybe I'm not a loser. Maybe I have something more to offer to this life is a really important turning point, that certainly David went through. I'm sure other people do as well. So, overall, here's what I would say. I really love the energy that this man has had. and continues to have in his life, and the drive and focus that he's applied to his work, his book writing, losing weight, running marathons, running a family. That really, people like that personally really inspire me. I love it when people are like, do you know what, I'm here, I'm on this planet, I've maybe only got one shot at this, so I'm going to give it absolutely everything I've got, and I'm not going to stop until I am exhausted by it. And so he said, have your fingers in as many pies as possible and exhaust yourself so that you fall asleep in bed at the end of the day from so much of what you have done throughout that day, if that's what you want to do. And I think this is very useful and helpful advice. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I would love to hear your thoughts about the conversation with David. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed having it. And I will see all of you guys on the next one. Take care. Bye. The People Building podcast was produced and edited by Gemma Bailey. You can find out more information about our products and services on peoplebuilding.co.uk, where you can also join in the conversation around specific episodes. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. It should not be considered professional advice. Unless specifically stated otherwise, we do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organisation that is presented within the podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced